It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to ParaTruth. What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of ParaTruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. As always, my name is Eric.
And I'm Justin.
And today we are diving into the hidden folklore, strange traditions, and magical mysteries behind our favorite holiday, Easter. It's right not both of our favorite holidays, but I quite enjoy it.
I feel that our, as in both of ours, is Halloween.
Yes.
I mean, Easter is a good one. It's just, honestly, I think Easter is one of those ones that has kind of went to the wayside from when we were kids.
I think ever since, after Grandma passed away, Easter just kind of went to the wayside because we used to have the Easter parties at our grandparents' house all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Kind of, for the most part, kind of went to the wayside. But for me, celebrating the resurrection of Christ and just usually if it's a nice warm day, then it's like, for me, the true introduction to not only spring, but also summer is right around the corner at that point. So there's a lot of things to look forward to. But I tell you what, Easter is one of those things that has been more, like back in the day, obviously, and I think for a lot of children, especially maybe some adults, Easter's all about the candy and the Easter bunnies and all that stuff. But after coming back to faith, it's kind of grown exponentially for me. So there's so much more happening, which of course the candy and the bunnies are all still wonderful, and I enjoy that stuff as well. But nonetheless, there is a lot of history and a lot of mysteries regarding let's say Halloween, regarding Easter. It actually has some interesting origins, and it is celebrated in various ways around the world. But with that said, today we're going to be covering a few different things on this topic, such as where exactly did the Easter Bunny really come from, which is a question I've always had because, what? Another one is, what do eggs have to do, or in this case, Easter eggs, have to do with the resurrection? And are there any paranormal legends tied to this holiday of rebirth? Now, we're going to get into all of that and much, much more. But I think let's just start right off the bat with maybe some ancient roots and pagan origins of the holiday, because I think that's probably the best place to start.
Yeah, for sure. And now, all of these were interesting to me because I had never heard of Ostara or Estri. But Ostara, also known as the spring equinox, is a pagan holiday celebrated around March 20th or 21st, somewhere in there, which is why Easter kind of hops around so much for us.
No pun intended. Hop.
I actually didn't even do that on purpose. Marking the beginning of spring and the balance of light and dark. It symbolizes renewal, rebirth, and the awakening of nature. Easter, or Esther, however you pronounce that, also known as Ostara or Easter, is a Germanic goddess associated with spring and dawn, and is believed to be the namesake for the Christian holiday of Easter. So that's where we get the name from. Hares, particularly the white hare, are often associated with fertility, rebirth, and the lunar cycle, making them fitting symbols for a spring festival. Eggs, especially painted or decorated, represented new life potential and cyclical nature, the cyclical nature of the earth, aligning with the themes of Ostara. And today, many of these pagan influenced traditions like egg hunts and the Easter bunny are still part of Easter celebrations, even though the primary focus of Easter is the Christian celebration of Christ's resurrection, like Eric had brought up. Now, like, I don't think the typical person associates any of these with Easter, at least those that come from a Christian background, because most of that is the pagan beliefs.
Right. And it's interesting to see how something I noticed, by the way, quick rabbit trail here. Also, no pun intended. It's just something we say on the regular. But I was listening to in this case, it'll be 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was listening to our prayer episode, and I realized how often I say during our show how something is interesting. And I do want to say that that's not just like a thing that I do. Like a lot of this stuff actually is very interesting to me. But I think I need to pull back on the interesting part a little bit. So
I say interesting or fascinating way too much, even in like texts to you or Shelly. You guys will send me something and I don't know what to respond, so I just respond interesting or fascinating.
I do that too
because it is. But
yeah, I get in trouble sometimes when I text people because I can be very short answered, and I short answer you a lot of the time, which is like cool or yay or nice. So they're like, all of which is true, but I don't know how I don't want to go and like nice and then reiterate everything you just told me just to like anyway. Glad you don't care.
Well, I'll have you go into the Easter bunny and magical creatures.
Heck yeah. All right. So Easter bunny and magical creatures, there are quite a few different creatures that are actually associated with this holiday or this time of year. Now, in various mythologies and folkloric traditions, the hare is often associated with fertility, love, and the other world, and sometimes even as a symbol of witchcraft or a messenger between worlds, with specific cultural interpretations varying across regions. And you might notice that, like, considering the fact that this is a messenger between worlds and even a symbol of witchcraft, there's only one of many creatures that actually are like that. The fox is another one. The crow is a big one that is popular amongst not just various witchcraft, but also things like I just had it in my mind, but I lost it. Viking type.
Oh, Nordic
faiths and things like that.
Yeah.
The
Norse mythology is
Norse. Yeah. That was what I was looking for. So we see a number of various belief systems that actually use animals to represent. I mean, Christianity is another one. They use specifically the ravens, crows, and the dove. All birds mostly.
And the lamb and the lion.
The lamb and the lion, yes. Wolves are mentioned as well. It's interesting that, I mean, it's just how I feel like a lot of these faiths really associate or use animals to help interpret things and help us understand things, because we as humans are so intrigued by those creatures, and kind of like when we hear, oh, this person's like a lion or that person's like a wolf, we immediately, gravitate to what that might mean. Which I don't know, is cool. Not interesting. Cool.
Well, one thing in, the pagan faiths, all of these animals are supposed to represent one of the gods, or they are the messengers for the gods and stuff like that. Where in Christian faith, it's more like metaphorical.
Right. So now let's jump into the folklore of various countries, for example. So one is like Irish folklore in particular. Hares in Ireland are mysterious creatures associated with the other world and the subject of legends, songs, and stories. And white hares are considered rare and touched by primordial spirits. Another rabbit trail. I saw a pure black duck today while I was out driving about today. I've never seen a black duck.
A pure black duck.
Pure black. It was wild, dude. There were two white ducks. There was like a black and white duck, and then there's just a pure black duck. I've never seen one before. It was kind of cool. Anyway, in Japanese folklore, hares are associated with the moon and Lunar New Year, symbolizing rebirth, the natural life cycle, and self-sacrifice. In Islamic folklore, the El Miraj, a mythical creature from Islamic folklore, is described as a yellow hair-like animal with a single black horn, which is not really to be trifled with. I mean, I probably wouldn't if I saw a rabbit with a horn. It's kind of creepy. And then the Osterhase, or the Easter hare, is of course, central figure in Easter bunny tradition, originating in the 18th century Germany, which was brought to America by German immigrants who settled in Pennsylvania, where they introduced the custom of egg-laying hares, which, if any of you know anything about rabbits of any type, they don't lay eggs. So that's kind of an interesting thing, right?
I wouldn't eat the chocolates that they lay either. So just FYI.
But as we can see, like throughout various cultures, they all have very similar, they all relate to each other. They all have very similar aspects to what the rabbit represents. And primarily is that it represents a symbol of rebirth and the natural life cycle, which again also is something that is not just popular, but is literally the standard in the Christian belief system as well of Easter. So that is something to kind of consider, because when we look at a lot of the holidays, a lot of the Christian holidays especially, they've all had pagan origins.
Mm-hmm.
And we see how that has adapted as Christianity had grown stronger and stronger on a yearly basis since it first showed up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that was kind of the point, was Christianity to get the attention or the to convert. Sorry, that's what the word I was looking for. To convert pagans by adapting their own beliefs into Christianity. Mm-hmm. And it does shock me, though, that they lasted this long. But many Christians today will be flippant with these traditions. They don't want to practice them, and they do not like people that do. Some, not all, some.
Yeah. No, for sure. There are plenty like that. And I know a few myself who refuse to celebrate Christmas or Easter.
And there's nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong to it. I think the issue is when those individuals try to tell others that they're wrong for celebrating such things, which is a whole nother, like, literally can get into a whole different topic on that.
No.
But
we are done it tons of times on here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things that has gone through the years, and it's just I can't think of another word, so I'll just leave it at that. It's one of those things that baffles my mind. We'll put it that way. That we've gone so long with keeping these traditions, and same goes for Halloween, Easter, Christmas, even and even Thanksgiving. Even though there's more to the history than that Native Americans and the Pilgrims got together and ate a meal. There's a lot of stuff that went on during that time that nobody talks about, and there's a lot of dark history. But it is one of those things that I think about a lot when we do shows like this. All right, so we've gone over the Easter bunny now. Something that I didn't include in here because it doesn't have Easter origins was the jackalope. That did come up in my research in hares that are mythical or magical. but again, that's one of those ones that it's like, I don't think we need to include it. And I don't think we'll ever do an entire episode on the jackalope either, just personally speaking, I guess. But egg symbolism and magical practices. Now, this, I saw a couple that I did know about. There were plenty of others that I had never heard of, but I included the ones that I have heard of because it would make more sense to me. The tradition of decorating eggs for spring festivals and religious celebrations has ancient roots, with evidence of decorated ostrich eggs found in Africa dating back 60,000 years. Think about that, 60,000 years. And practices in cultures like ancient Persia and even Mesopotamia, which I believe Persia is now Iraq or part of Iraq, I think. Now, in various cultures, eggs hold folkloric significance in rituals and divination practices, often symbolizing life and fertility and new beginnings, with egg whites used for divination by interpreting the shapes formed when dropped into water, similar to like tea leaves. So oomancy or ovomancy, this form of divination, also known as egg magic, involves interpreting the shapes formed by egg whites when dropped into water to predict the future. Had you ever heard of that before?
I have. Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Egg curing. I have heard of this one. In some traditions, eggs are used in healing practices, with the egg being rubbed over the body of a patient to diagnose or relieve illness. I have also seen it where after rubbing it all over wherever it is, after they detect it, and they, I think, rub it even more in that area, they'll smash the egg to represent that that's being cured, whatever it is. And the third one is protection. Eggs can be used as talismans to protect homes or individuals from negative influences or malevolent spirits. I didn't do research on this part, but I believe that is part of why Fabergé eggs are a thing.
Okay.
But I don't remember for sure. But
yeah, I actually didn't know that people used actual eggs as talismans to protect homes or themselves from negative influences. It's kind of weird to me, but I guess I kind of get it at the same time. But I don't really fully understand how it works. You know, like when you think about various crystals, for example, we have things like obsidian, which is believed to absorb negative energies into itself, which protects the wearer. Whereas you have things like any sort of white crystals, you know, they tend to reflect or deflect or even just cleanse the area around you to protect you from those same types of energies and spirits. Eggs is not one that usually would line up with that kind of perspective. But I do see how there are a number of different cultures that use stone eggs or marble-like eggs as a representation of some sort of protection or just a representation of like new beginnings and fertility.
Well, a practice that I've heard of, you might have heard of it and you just didn't realize it, is putting an egg in a glass of water. And then I don't remember if you put it in the sun or you just put it in a corner. I think you just put it in a corner of the home, especially if you're feeling any negative energy or anything like that. And then when the egg floats, the energy has been absorbed and you have to throw the egg away, and not just throw it away. You have to get it out of the house.
Yeah. Which is pretty typical with anything that you're doing in terms of the purification rituals of cleansing a house. Same thing with like sage. People will say that you have to flush sage down a toilet or you need to bury it somewhere after cleansing a home. You know, all the ash and stuff. Same thing if you use mojo bags or anything like that. So I see why you would have to throw it away, you know, to get rid of it as both a literal way of getting rid of the energy, but also as a symbolic practice to remove it from their home and from you and your space.
And I'm trying to think of others that I've heard of. That's the main one I've heard of for protection. So you've heard of ovomancy. Like, what have you seen? Like, have you seen any videos on people doing it or anything like that, or using it?
I've not I mean, I've watched videos in which they show portions of it, but not like a full video of the actual interpretation of the egg whites. But yeah, I have heard of it, and I've read things on it, and I've watched like mini documentaries on how it's done. It's very similar to like reading tea leaves at the bottom of a teacup, or something like that. It's not much different. So, I mean, the person who's predicting it obviously has studied various methods to interpret such things. The same thing as like a dream interpreter or someone who interprets the leaves. Like you and I probably couldn't just go and do that because we wouldn't know what the heck we're looking at other than, oh, there's egg white in water, or there's tea leaves at the bottom of a cup. So, there's experienced individuals who spent many years studying that particular form of divination, and it's something that they typically do. And of course, there's people who actually get paid to do that kind of thing, which, of course, I understand. And I'm also like, what? That's weird. Why? But hey, it's just like anything else. Palm reading, Reiki, things like that. Like there are things that we don't fully understand or recognize as to how it is interpreted or why it interprets a certain way. And I think the problem with some of these things is the interpretation is only from one person. Like it's not like a scientific method where you have multiple people interpreting this thing and then you're choosing the one that seems to align the best. Like if you have like three or four people interpreting the same egg white, and two of them happen to align with the same interpretation and the other two are in two separate places, well, then it's like, oh, it must be the two who are, linked. That must be the correct interpretation. And I think that's the problem we have with any sort of form of divination like that. You're basically just putting all of we've actually talked about this with a couple of guests of ours recently, relatively recently. I think it was probably this past summer or fall, where I forget her name, but she was telling us that when someone's doing divination, or interpreting something like tea leaves, you're just leaving it up to that person's interpretation. And that interpretation could be right. It could be wrong. It could just be, who knows, whatever. You take that same exact cup to somebody else and they interpret it different. And that's, kind of the issue, I think, with some of these forms of divination. So, but nonetheless, I mean, it is interesting. I think it's, from my, uneducated mind, it's weird, but nonetheless, it is interesting. And I am using the word interesting here because it is. One other thing I wanted to kind of touch base here on with egg symbolism, because Christians actually still use the symbolic nature of the egg as well. People think, oh, well, Christians don't use it because that's a pagan thing, but it's not entirely true. In fact, Christians for many, many years, especially in the early ages of Christianity, would actually paint eggs red to represent the blood of Christ that was shed upon the cross, and they would hide it for children to run around and try to find, just like we do Easter egg hunts today. The other thing that is very interesting is that the egg represents, in a sense, the resurrection of Christ, because just like Christ, who was in a grave, rolled away the stone and kind of broke forth from the grave, so too does the egg break its shell, and forth comes the yolk, the new life. Or I should say the bird in this case, or whatever creature's hatching from, to be an alligator. I don't know, anything. But it's often interpreted or used in Christian faith systems as well to represent some sort of, a certain powerful idea regarding the resurrection and beginning of new life.
Now, all I can think of now is like of moms going to make poached eggs, and then they're like, oh, I gotta look this up. What's the symbolism behind this?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't necessarily say hot water, it just says water. So I don't know if it has to be hot, and that's, the shape, because it is usually a little clear, at least cloudy.
Right.
So,
yeah, I don't know.
But, I get, you'd mentioned Christianity using animals, but is the rabbit mentioned at all?
No.
Okay. So maybe that was just one of the ones that they really truly took from paganism to bring into Christianity. All right. So
yeah, I'm not even sure how, I don't even know how Christianity would have adopted the rabbit for anything.
Right.
I don't know. It's probably just I just see some of these things they're for children, straight and simple. It's easy to use a rabbit because they're cute and fluffy, and everyone loves rabbits because of that reason. Unless you're the type of person who likes the taste of rabbit instead. But aside from that,
I had never heard about the church painting eggs red to represent the blood of Christ. That's interesting too. Mm-hmm. I don't feel as a kid I would have been, well, I take that back. My favorite color is red, but I don't feel I would have been searching for the blood of Christ instead of just Easter eggs. But it has created a good tradition for families to do things together,
right?
If nothing else, during the holidays. Well, why don't you go into the resurrection myths? But I felt you could probably go more into the Christian myths more than the ones that are of pagan origin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
sure. So, so while many cultures and religions feature stories of figures returning from the dead, the Christian resurrection story of Jesus is unique in its emphasis on a historical event, and I want to highlight historical event and its central role in Christian theology, which distinguishes it from myths that often focus on cyclic or symbolic returns. Now, I want to just real quick touch base on the historical event because there is so one thing I really love about theology when it comes to the Christian faith is this idea of the term maps. MAP stands for manuscripts, archaeology, prophecy, and scripture. And when those four things align, it reveals a truth. And so we could see in mythology, or I'm sorry, in the manuscripts, that Christ rose from the dead, that he died and rose from the dead. Then we have archaeology, which revealed that same evidence that indeed there have been other things either written or items found that lead straight or point straight or directly to the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. We have prophecies, of course, throughout the scripture, and not just scripture alone, but there are some, we call it apocrypha type writings that have also prophesied of Christ's death and resurrection. And the scripture or statistics is another one that people often use, and that's the simple fact that both the statistics and the scriptures align to share that same proof, that same evidence that we've already found with the archaeology and the manuscripts and the prophecies. So, a lot of people think, Jesus's death and resurrection is just fictional. It's amazing how many people believe that Jesus himself never even lived, even as just a person, let alone God. But it's a simple fact that you can ask any historian and they will tell you that truth, even if they don't believe in the Christian faith. So that's important first and foremost. Also, unlike any resurrection story, the historical and spiritual significance of Jesus's death was done as a willing sacrifice for the sins of the world and anyone who chooses to place their faith in Jesus as the one true God, author of creation and savior of humanity. And it is written in the scripture that there is no name under heaven by which man can be saved except for one, and that is Jesus Christ. And you can look at every other faith throughout the world, and not a single one will tell you how to be saved by a single name. They'll tell you that you have to work toward it. You have to pray. You have to work hard. You got to do this, do that. And the scriptures tell us, the Christian scriptures tell us, no, you don't. You have to believe in Jesus, that he's your Lord and Savior, and everything else is done. There's nothing to be worked, nothing that has to be paid for. Jesus did it all. And I think that's a really important and strong difference between the Christian faith and some of these other ones that we're about to go into, because the resurrection story of the Christian faith is vastly different. So with that said, there are a few other resurrection stories. One in particular is Isis and Osiris, which is ancient Egypt. Now, in this story, Osiris is killed and resurrected by his wife Isis, but the story is primarily symbolic and how do we say it again?
Cyclical.
Cyclical. Words, man. And then we have Romulus, not like the recent Alien movie, but similar, which is of Roman mythology. And in this case, Romulus, which is the legendary king of Rome, is said to have been born from a virgin, much like our Jesus, and conceived by the god Mars, which is very different. And his death and resurrection are part of Roman mythology, of course. And then we have Dionysus, which is Greek mythology. And Dionysus is the god of wine and revelry, who is said to have been killed and resurrected. And his story is part of, once again, Greek mythology. And we see things like this here and there, but a lot of this is very, they're either random, like random in terms of why they're killed and resurrected, or they're very selfish in some ways, such as simply being of symbolic and cyclical nature. There's no real reason for the death and resurrection except that it happened. But nonetheless, we see very similar stories throughout various faiths. We see that there are versions of the Great Flood, for example, in Buddhism, just as we see in the Christian faith. And then we see various events like that throughout all the different religions that seem similar or related in some sense. And I think there's a reason to that. I think it's therefore, specifically to kind of help read through the basically the wheat and the chaff, what's good and what's bad, and find the people who are true believers versus the ones who are not. And that seems a little weird, a little like confusing, but nonetheless, it's a thing. But yeah, resurrection stories have always been really interesting. And of course, resurrection is naturally the most important thing when it comes to Easter that we consider, and not just in the fact that Christ rose, but it's, again, a moment of rebirth. We're talking, this is after winter, which is a primary example of just death, right? Fall is the representation of things dying. Winter is kind of the death season. And then Easter is this representation of rebirth, where everything blooms and comes back to life, refreshed and anew. So even if you're not a follower of Christ, many people will still use this time to kind of metaphorically, and in some times literally, renew their own lives. Take a fresh start over. Let go of the past and move forward into the present and the future.
Well, one thing that I will say about the people claiming that Jesus wasn't real is because Jesus wasn't really his name. It's just what he goes by in the Bible because of, I believe it was the Romans that gave him, or maybe it was the Jews that gave him the name because it means Messiah. Is that right?
Yeah, but his name was Yeshua, which is translated to Joshua and then Jesus. So it is very much a modern interpretation of the original Hebrew.
Okay.
In this case, even Aramaic, because the New Testament was written in Aramaic, as opposed to the Old Testament, which is written in Hebrew and Greek. New Testament was also written in Greek. But yeah, so his name was indeed Jesus. The Romans did put a sign, little plaque at the top of his crucifix or his cross that read, "Here's Jesus, King of the Jews," as kind of a slap in the face, kind of showing the Jewish people, like they're basically mocking him, saying, "Oh, he's the King of the Jews. Well, here he is hanging on this cross," not realizing that they were literally giving him the title that he's always claimed he was. But beyond that, because not just King of the Jews, but King of the universe, King of heaven, which many people that day actually end up learning. There's a man on the cross, two criminals on either side of him, and the one to his left actually believes in Jesus in that very moment as Jesus is about to die. And Jesus says, "Truly, I tell you, you'll be in paradise with me." And we see also Roman soldiers, one in particular, and this isn't necessarily biblical, but more of a, I want to say historical, but it's believed through some evidence, and I can't tell you which, that the man who thrust the spear into Jesus's side after Jesus died and out came water, suddenly became a believer because of the way he committed his spirit to God and the way the earth shook and the sky went dark. So there's a lot of events that happened in that moment that turned a lot of people away from this unbelief into full belief. And of course, a lot of the events would follow after that, after Jesus' resurrection, that would just literally birth the Christian faith and spark a new movement.
Okay. And something I've never been clear on, I'm sure you probably can clarify, is, are we celebrating just his resurrection or death and resurrection?
We are celebrating his death and resurrection. Some will argue what the celebration part is of his death. I think it's more of a mourning, like
we do in normal ceremonies of death today.
In a way, it's like, so you have to remember, when Jesus died, he was roughly 33 years old, and it was about 3 years into his ministry. And everything Jesus did was set up that he would eventually be placed on the cross. He knew from the beginning, and he prophesied about it over and over again, and no one believed him. And so when he did eventually die, everyone was shook to the core. In fact, the disciples at the time, I mean, even when Jesus was taken first in chains and pulled away, the disciples just split. They dispersed. After his death, they didn't come back together. They didn't want anything to do with his teachings, because their savior, who they believed was God, was gone, and they didn't think he'd come back. So this was a very dark time, this would have been like Friday night. And typically a day in the Jewish calendar, if I'm not mistaken, starts at nighttime. So roughly midnight or so, or maybe it's like somewhere between 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. But anyways, when he died, and he died roughly around 3 p.m. On Friday night or afternoon, people scattered. They were afraid. They thought that the Pharisees and the Roman guards would come down on them heavy and take them on to custody as well. And then, of course, we have all night Friday, all day and all night Saturday, and then Sunday morning, the resurrection. And the reason why we celebrate it now is because the whole reason we have the resurrection and the renewal of life and life eternal, if we believe, is because he died. And if he didn't die, then that resurrection could have never happened. So the whole reason Christianity even exists is due to the death, first and foremost.
Right. Well, I always thought that that's what the case was. We're not just celebrating his life from dying, but also him coming back from the dead. But as of lately, I've been trying to think, like, is it supposed to be both, or is it supposed to be just one?
I mean, Easter itself is a celebration of his resurrection. Good Friday, which happens the Friday prior to Easter, is the celebration or remembrance of his death. So, on Easter morning, we're not thinking about his death anymore. We're not celebrating the death, we're celebrating the resurrection. So in that case, Easter itself is of the resurrection only.
Okay. Though I feel Good Friday was not the best name to represent the death of a Messiah. But
Good Friday comes from a more historical significance in regard to the Passover.
okay.
But nonetheless, one will argue that it's Good Friday because, again, if he hadn't died, he would have been resurrected.
Right. Yeah. Huh. Very, very interesting. I'm gonna have to start looking up some new words.
Just keep a dictionary in front of us.
Yeah. I wanted to go over some of this other folklore that you had come up with.
Yeah.
And since you put it in there, I'll have you go over it because it's one of those things that I think we need to share it.
Wait. Am I missing something?
It's at the very top under C.
Oh, the top. Okay. I was like, wait a second. What are we talking about? All right. Under C. Here we go. So, yeah, aside from the supernatural fact of Jesus's resurrection, Easter has often been associated with the banishing of witches in Europe. In Northern Europe folklore in particular, Easter is seen as a time to banish witches by lighting Osterfeuer, or in other words, Easter fires, in Germany, which are believed to scare away witches, which is kind of similar in a way to the bonfires that are lit on Halloween night to ward away evil spirits. Now, in Sweden, folklore states that at Easter, witches fly to the island of Blakula, which I think is how it's pronounced, in the Baltic Sea to feast and dance with the devil himself. And some traditions even hold that little girls would dress in rags and, going from door to door with a copper kettle, were said to be a way of scaring away witches who would fly to the German mountain the Thursday before Easter to cavort with Satan.
And I don't understand how we went from celebrating the life or death and life of Christ to
witches.
They're cavorting with Satan on Easter. And I'm assuming this is after the death of Jesus when this all was being practiced. But
yeah, I mean, a lot of this, again, these are, again, mythologies that I think even to this day, to some extent, are held in Northern European folklore. And folklore has been known as one of those things. I mean, we have it everywhere. Like it all originated more or less from Europe, came over to the Americas, and even the Americas had their own folklore. Like, where we have the Dog Man and things like the Frogland, Loveland Frog Monster, or Frogman, I should say, Loveland Frogman. Amongst many other creatures here, the Wendigo is another one that's very much a folkloric tale here in America. So folklore extends to various different things, but often witches is one of those things that we're not talking about like the modern witch. We're talking about what people believed witches were, which were these evil entities or beings that associated with the devil and did his bidding in many cases, often believed to be immortal to some extent. And it's in particular why there were so many burnings of witches in Europe and then hangings here in America during the whole fearful witch trial time, because people just didn't know or understand the practices, and not to mention that many of the practices weren't even happening. A lot of these people who were murdered weren't even actual like practicing witches. Like they were just normal people that unfortunately were pointed at. And yeah.
Well, and I think that's why when we were under ParaTruth Radio, we kind of delved into the Salem witch trials and named it was it the beginning of communism in America?
The beginning of American communism.
Yeah. That was the title. So, we are definitely going to have to do another Salem episode. Which trials in general, I think, is on my list. So we'll have to delve into a lot of that. Okay, so I think the last part of this episode, it'd be fun to go over some not so well known facts of Easter.
Yeah, I'd say mostly not well known. Some of them are probably known, but it's fun nonetheless. There's 20.
Maybe just not known to me yet.
Yeah, let me go through them and we'll see what you know and what you don't know. But yeah, I have 25 facts here, some of which are pretty interesting. So number one, and this is probably pretty obvious, but eggs used to be colored with natural ingredients, meaning that leftover onion peels, tree bark, and even flower petals were used as key ingredients to dye eggs. And this is something you can still do today. In fact, people can actually use onion skin to dye their Easter eggs a various yellow or yellowish brown color. Probably not as easy as just dipping in dye like we do nowadays or painting with a marker, but nonetheless.
I feel that would affect the taste of the egg, no? Because of the shell protecting it?
If you eat it, yeah.
If you eat it. I thought that was the point.
I really don't know. I mean, I've decorated eggs and I've never eaten them.
Really?
Back then. I now eat like obviously hard-boiled eggs or regular eggs.
Right.
I don't know. It's always been weird because when you dye an egg, the dye tends to seep through the shell and onto the egg itself. So I agree, like if you're using onion, it probably would definitely do that to the egg as well. But I also don't know if these eggs were hard-boiled
right.
So I don't know if that was a thing. Number two, this one's fun. The original Easter hare would judge kids to see if they were naughty or nice.
So another Santa Claus. Yeah.
The date of Easter changes every year, which is interesting because what I find interesting about that one, at least when we're talking about the Christian faith system, obviously Jesus wasn't resurrected on a different day over and over again. It was just one particular day. So this is just a celebration. Unlike Christmas, which happens on the 25th every year for a celebration. Easter is one of those that always changes. And unlike Halloween, always happens on the 31st.
Right.
Number 4, there are religious connections between Easter and pastel colors. I believe, let me click. Oh, nope, it's not going to let me check. But basically, other than just spring, I mean, pastel colors tend to represent spring the most because of the bright, various colors that we see during spring, like the greens and the pinks of flowers and stuff like that. But there's also religious symbolism for Lent, Good Friday, and Easter as well. Purple, for example, is a very strong one for Easter, the resurrection. Number 5, the most expensive. Can you guess the most expensive chocolate Easter bunny cost?
The cost.
The most expensive chocolate Easter bunny.
$2,500.
You're a little low.
Really?
Like,
I thought I was going to be way over.
A little by a lot. So the answer is $49,000.
Holy criminy.
Yeah. Yeah. It also contained 548,000 calories.
Jeez.
So yeah, you don't eat that in one sitting. Otherwise, you're good for the entire year.
You'll end up with diabetes for sure.
100%. Number 6, before Easter baskets, children would put their eggs in a hat filled with straw.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why we use the grass for Easter eggs.
Yep, 100%. 7, the average shopper spends around $169.79 during Easter. Well, there's probably primarily on candy too, but it's estimated that $20.8 billion was spent on Easter of 2023, 2 years ago. So
holy.
I think this one's kind of obvious, but Easter is the oldest Christian holiday on record, even prior to Christmas. We already talked about eggs being dyed representing the blood of Christ, so we can pass on that one. Here's one. Justin, wait, do you eat chocolate?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you prefer milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
Dark chocolate.
Interesting. So number 10, most adults prefer milk chocolate to dark chocolate. But you're also a kid at heart, so makes sense. Although I don't know what kid likes dark chocolate over milk chocolate.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know Shelley prefers milk chocolate over dark chocolate.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. For those in the U.S., Good Friday is only honored in some states. While Good Friday is a major holiday for all Catholics, only 12 out of 50 states consider that Friday before Easter an actual federal holiday. Most of the country will just still go to work on Good Friday.
Now, Ash Wednesday, is that a part of Easter? Or is that
It's not a part of Easter.
different?
No,
Okay.
it's part of Lent.
Okay.
So giving eggs, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but giving eggs is a symbol of rebirth in many cultures. So that's actually giving an egg to somebody. And I do recall, like, when I forget, I don't know what faith it was, but I do recall it in some systems, an egg would be offered to someone who is pregnant or trying to become pregnant as a symbolic way of fertility, to basically like a good luck charm.
Yeah.
Number 13, Americans will consume more than 16 million jelly beans, and about 15 million of those will be enjoyed by myself. Okay, this is weird. Number 14, pretzels are linked to Easter too. So supposedly, it's because the twists of the pretzel look like arms crossed in prayer. You can pay homage to the sweet treat. I've never thought of a pretzel being sweet. And all it stands for by making these chocolate pretzels treats. Oh, you can make chocolate pretzels treats as a form of prayer. The Easter Bunny didn't always lay eggs. In fact, the Easter Bunny never laid eggs because Easter bunnies don't lay eggs. But this one does, for the holiday. The Fluffy Bunny stems from an Anglo-Saxon festival of Easter, which featured a spring goddess who used the rabbit to represent fertility, as we discussed. And of course, it wasn't until the Germans settled in Pennsylvania in the 1700s who decided to use the bunny that lays eggs here in America. The one thing that I never really fully understood is exactly how how the bunny and the eggs correspond, like why that happened.
Why they're together, right? Yeah. And I didn't come across anything in looking through all this research in the notes that I came up with that really explains it.
Yeah, I didn't find anything either. Number 16, buying a new outfit for Easter stems from a superstition. Back in the mid-1800s in New York, people believed that buying new clothes to wear on Easter would bring them good luck for the rest of the year. It's another way for Americans to spend money. The world's largest chocolate egg was made in Italy, number 17, and it happened to measure 34 feet and was 1.05 inches in length and weighed, 34 feet and 1.5 inches in length. So wouldn't that be like 35.5? Anyway, it weighed approximately 15,873 pounds. Yeah.
That math doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense at all. Who wrote this article? I'm sending an email. Oh, goodness. Let's see. I'm not going to read all 25 of these, actually. Some of them are like, what? So decorating eggs comes from a Ukrainian tradition, apparently. The ornate eggs were called besanskas, which were made by using wax and dyes. And it wasn't until Ukrainian immigrants came to the U.S. that the colorful custom actually caught on here.
Okay.
During medieval times, a very different game was played with eggs. In this case, like, can you imagine throwing eggs in church, which I think whether church or school or something, we've all probably thrown eggs at some point, usually like the catch thing, Like you throw an egg and you step a foot, take one step back, throw the egg back and forth again, take another step, and see how many times or how far
you can get. Yeah.
Well, they would do the exact something very similar. The priest would actually throw a hard-boiled egg to one of the choir boys, and he would continue to toss it to his peers. And whoever was holding the egg when the clock struck 12 was the winner and got to keep the egg. Let's see if there's any other good ones here. Well, Easter is the second biggest candy consuming holiday next to Halloween.
I would have thought Valentine's Day.
Nope. That's probably strawberries.
That could be.
And the last one I think I'm going to do is, let's see here. I'm going to do two more. So one is, it used to take more than a day to make a peep. And in fact, it would take approximately 27 hours to be precise. That was back in 1953 when each candy was handmade with a pastry tube. But of course, today they have machines and it only takes about 6 minutes. Can you imagine 27 hours to 6 minutes for a peep? That's crazy.
Right.
And finally, all of you chime in, whether or not you're one of the probably many who do this. But number 25, most Americans bite off the ears of a chocolate bunny first. Yep, it's a name. Hands up all around. I also do that to animal crackers. When I bite the legs off first or the ears.
And I would wonder why we do that. Like, I would say the majority of people do.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, I feel like it's just because you get this bulky piece of chocolate and you get this thinner piece of chocolate. So and pop that sucker off. But I don't know.
That's a good possibility. And probably the easiest way so that you're not getting chocolate on your face trying to shove the bigger portions in your face too.
That's possible.
All right. So I want to say this. I usually say, make sure you like, share, subscribe wherever you listen. We're really trying to grow our YouTube channel. So if you watch us on YouTube, please make sure you like, share, subscribe. Join us in our chat off to my left. It would be your right as you're watching. And comment if you don't get into chat. We would love to hear your thoughts on anything that we're talking about. So the question for you guys to answer for this video is in the comments. Tell us, what is the Easter tradition that you practice the most or enjoy the most? But also make sure you're checking out all the shows on United Public Radio Network, because there's so many, and there's actually more coming on as well. There will be actually a show before ours that very, very soon. And so again, this has been a pre-recorded show on 107.7 New Orleans and United Public Radio Network. Happy Easter to everybody that practices it. Whatever you practice, I hope you're enjoying the day and enjoying it with family and friends. Until next week, where you'll find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.